On the 24th of June 1314, King Robert, the Bruce of Scotland, prepared his Chiltern formations for the fateful clash at Bannockburn. With unyielding resolve, he grasped his sword and commanded his troops to advance, his booming voice resonating across the battlefield. Like an unstoppable tide of defiance, the Chiltern surged forward, poised to break the ranks of the English knights. The fate of Scotland's hard-fought independence hung in the balance, the outcome of this pivotal showdown holding the destiny of nations, with its significance to be forever etched into history. At the turn of the 14th century, Scotland found itself embroiled in relentless conflict. The Scottish Wars of Independence had been raging since 1296, marked by both triumphs and setbacks for Scotland. Notably, the legendary rebel William Wallace had dealt a significant blow to the English, although he ultimately succumbed to the formidable Edward I. Despite this defeat, Wallace's heroic struggle ignited a fervent sentiment of resentment and resistance to English dominion throughout Scotland. Amidst this turbulent landscape of feuding nobility, one figure emerged to shape the course of the nation's fate: Robert the Bruce. A prominent noble with blood connections to past Scottish monarchs, Robert would play a pivotal role in the events that followed. Robert the Bruce's loyalties were intricate and uncertain. Initially, during the rebellion against English rule in 1296, he found himself aligned with Edward I, alongside other influential Scottish figures. This surprising alliance arose from his intense rivalry for the Scottish throne, which he believed was rightfully his, and his opposition to the powerful Comyn family who resisted Edward's rule. However, tensions escalated in 1306. During a meeting with the Commons, Robert the Bruce fatally wounded his opponent after a heated dispute. This act of violence left Bruce with no option but to claim the Scottish throne, resulting in his excommunication by the Pope and persecution by the English king. Asserting his claim as the great-great-grandson of David I, Bruce received his coronation at Scone on the 25th of March, with the support of a faction within the Scottish church nobility. Nevertheless, Bruce faced staunch opposition from various Scottish lords, particularly the Commons and their allies seeking revenge, while others outright rejected his claim. In the meantime, one of Edward I's lieutenants confronted Bruce's forces, leading to the dispersal and defeat of Bruce's army at Methven in June 1306. By the end of June, Bruce's position had crumbled and his supporters were scattered, leaving him as a hunted fugitive. Despite the dire circumstances, Bruce managed to elude his pursuers and sought refuge on the remote island of Rathlin, where he regrouped and reorganized his forces. In early 1307, Robert the Bruce, accompanied by a small group of followers, boldly returned to the mainland, making landfall in Ayrshire before vanishing into the rugged wilderness of Carrick. Simultaneously, his younger brothers led an expedition to Galloway with the intent of disrupting English communications. However, their plans took a disastrous turn as they fell into an ambush and were subsequently captured. Under King Edward I's command, Bruce's brothers met a grim fate, facing execution by hanging. Despite the influx of English troops into the southern regions of Scotland, Bruce's following steadily grew, and he achieved some triumphs against the English in confrontations at Glentrool and Loudon Hill. On July 7, 1307, the formidable old King Edward I died, leaving his politically inept son, Edward II, to grapple with a kingdom rife with internal strife and dissent. Edward II faced numerous distractions due to his favoritism of unpopular nobles and opposition from his barons. This diversion provided Robert the Bruce with a crucial window of opportunity to confront his Scottish adversaries. Bruce swiftly retaliated against his enemies in the southwest, before advancing northward to challenge his chief rivals. With his eventual triumph, Bruce was able to consolidate his hold over Aberdeen and the northeastern region. Having vanquished most of his Scottish opponents by 1309, Bruce shifted his focus towards expelling the English from his kingdom. Over the following years, he solidified his position in Scotland by conquering most of the English-held castles and rallying the remaining powerful Scottish nobles to support his victorious cause. By 1314, Bruce's brother was besieging one of the last key fortifications still in English hands, Stirling Castle. The besieged governor of Stirling Castle acknowledged the inevitable fall of the stronghold and reached an agreement with Edward Bruce, pledging to surrender the castle if no relief arrived by June the 24th. However, King Robert Bruce was displeased with this arrangement, recognizing that the deadline would prompt the English into immediate action. At this critical juncture, the prospect of a pitched battle emerged as the only means to prevent the castle's relief, and Robert Bruce was well aware that such an encounter could jeopardize the hard-won gains of his campaign thus far. Meanwhile, King Edward II urgently sought to mend relationships with his barons and marched northwards to Berwick, hastily assembling an army to relieve Stirling by the appointed date of June the 24th. As the English army advanced towards Stirling, meticulous arrangements were required to store and transport supplies. Employing scorched earth tactics, the Scots ensured that the advancing English forces found minimal substance in the devastated terrain. Facing an adversary with an army almost twice the size of his own, King Robert Bruce strategically positioned his forces a few kilometers south of Stirling, patiently awaiting Edward II's approach and the impending confrontation near a stream known as Bannockburn. Robert organized a force of about 7,000 to 8,000 infantry into 4 divisions known as schiltrons, strong defensive squares of men equipped with pikes. He strategically positioned these divisions along the road that traverses the New Park Forest leading to Stirling. On the morning of June the 23rd, light Scottish horsemen conducted a patrol to observe the arrival of the English army. The sight of 2,500 heavily armored knights, resplendent in their gleaming weapons and armor, was formidable, followed by 11,000 infantry marching a few miles behind. The advancement of 2 English cavalry formations marked a significant development in the unfolding events. The first formation was under the command of the Earl of Gloucester and the Earl of Hereford. The second, a smaller contingent of approximately 600 soldiers, led by Sir Robert Clifford, pursued a route closer to the River Forth, aiming to cut off the Scottish line of retreat towards Stirling Castle. Subsequently, the Hereford-Gloucester force, spearheading the advance, successfully crossed the Bannockburn and proceeded towards the dense woodlands concealing the Scots. Unbeknownst to the English forces, King Robert Bruce had ventured ahead on a minor reconnaissance mission, without wearing his heavy protective armor. At that moment, the impetuous young noble Harry de Bohun caught sight of a knight mounted on a small grey horse, commanding his pikemen while wielding an axe in his hand. The presence of a double-treasured lion on his surcoat and the glint of gold from the crown encircling his helmet left no room for doubt. The knight was none other than the renowned Bruce. De Bohun, attuned to the opportunity for personal glory, rapidly altered his course, spurring his horse towards the king with an air of arrogance. Fearlessly, Bruce steered his horse towards his challenger, who approached on full gallop. As the distance between the 2 combatants closed, Bruce demonstrated his remarkable dexterity by maneuvering his steed, eluding the thrust of de Bohun's lance. Rising in his stirrups, Bruce dealt a powerful blow with his axe, slicing through the English knight's helmet and penetrating deeply into his brain, killing him instantly. Fueled by their leader's gallantry, the Scots pressed forward to face the incoming English. As Hereford's men continued their advance along the road, expecting the Scots to retreat, they were taken aback to discover that Robert had cunningly prepared large pits covered with branches throughout the open field in front of his army. Instead of yielding ground, the Scottish schiltrons lowered their spears, forming a phalanx-like formation, and launched a fierce counterattack, inflicting heavy losses on Hereford's cavalry as they encountered the formidable wall of Scottish pikes. Simultaneously, another schiltron emerged from the woods, moving strategically to shield the flanks of the engaged schiltron against Gloucester's insurgents. Meanwhile, the commander of the Scottish left flank noticed Clifford's contingent attempting to circle their position. He skillfully led his men out of the woods, forming a sturdy formation of spearmen. Despite repeated attacks from Clifford's cavalry, the Scottish formation remained impenetrable, frustrating the knights, who were forced to resort to throwing various weapons at the Scots. At that critical juncture, another Scottish contingent joined the fray, relieving the pressure on their allies. Seizing the opportunity, the engaged Scots charged against the English ranks, compelling the English heavy cavalry to retreat and effectively concluding their fight for the day. Although the English maintained a significant numerical advantage and their losses were not substantial, their morale suffered greatly from the fierce combat. As evening approached, King Edward's troops sought a place to encamp. He decided to move most of the cavalry and about half of the infantry into a marshy area across the Bannockburn, while the remaining infantry was stationed on the other side of the stream. Meanwhile, Robert Bruce called a council of war with his officers. Though past experiences had taught him to avoid pitched battles against heavy cavalry, valuable information from a defector, a Scottish knight in English service, shifted the odds. The defector revealed that the English were demoralized and disorganized, providing a convincing case for a victorious attack if Bruce chose to do so the following morning. Upon hearing this vital information, Robert asked his officers for their views on whether to engage. With unwavering determination, they unanimously advocated for battle. On the morning of June the 24th, the English displayed a shift in attitude from an earlier sense of overconfidence to one of caution. King Edward II positioned his cavalry at the front of his army, with archers and infantry forming up behind them. In response, King Robert the Bruce made the daring decision to lead his outnumbered Scottish forces across the open field. Against the formidable English army, King Robert Bruce executed what may have appeared to be a perilous maneuver, advancing his infantry against heavy cavalry. However, this audacious move was made possible by Robert's innovative training of schiltrons, enabling them to move in formation, a key difference from tactics employed by the Scots in the past. To divert attention away from his spearmen, Robert dispatched his archers ahead, skillfully drawing the focus of the English bowmen onto the Scottish archers. During this initial skirmish, the English archers eventually got the better of their Scottish counterparts, forcing them to retreat, but only after diverting their attention enough to enable the schiltrons to close the distance. As the English lines were still forming, a dispute ensued among their commanders over who should lead the cavalry attack. The Earl of Gloucester, previously accused of cowardice, impatiently charged headlong across the open space between the two armies, accompanied by Clifford and other prominent knights. Regrettably, their charge met a swift and fatal end as they collided with Edward Bruce's impenetrable wall of raised spears, resulting in the majority of the charging English cavalry being obliterated, with young Gloucester among the first to fall. In the wake of this disastrous cavalry assault, the formidable Scottish schiltrons steadily advanced, withstanding dogged and stubborn English attacks while inflicting devastating losses. The unexpectedly rapid advance of the spearmen left the English knights with no time or room to maneuver, gradually hemming them in between the Bannockburn and the marshy area. As the grueling battle progressed, the Scottish formations displayed remarkable discipline and cohesion against the flower of the English knights. Being hemmed in, the English knights were unable to utilize their greatest strength, the unstoppable momentum of their mounts. At the same time, a significant group of English archers took precarious positions on the flank of the battle and unleashed an unrelenting and crippling hail of arrows. The ferocity of their shooting was so relentless that if it had continued, the situation could have become critical for the Scots. Yet Robert Bruce showed a keen tactical understanding and recognized the imminent danger presented by the English archers. He quickly commanded his reserve light cavalry to counter the archers promptly. The charge executed by the light horse proved remarkably effective, dispersing the archers and throwing them into disarray amidst the advancing English forces from the rear. This further heightened the confusion and alarm amongst the English ranks. After firmly repelling the English bowmen, the Scottish archers gained newfound courage and unleashed an unyielding torrent of arrows upon the struggling enemy mass. At first, the English forces gave way gradually, but their resistance ultimately crumbled. causing a rapid escalation of men breaking away and fleeing towards the rear. The resounding triumph of the Scots was met with a jubilant shout from their ranks, emboldening the Chilterns to surge forward and capitalize on the English retreat. Facing imminent defeat, King Edward hastily escaped with his personal bodyguard, causing panic among the remaining troops and transforming their retreat into a full-fledged rout. The losses suffered by the English during the course of the battle, and especially after the rout, were indeed disastrous, with some estimates indicating an almost total eradication of their infantry forces. Knights and men-at-arms were not spared either, as casualties reached as high as 700 individuals killed. In stark contrast, the Scots suffered relatively light losses, securing an unparalleled triumph for Robert the Bruce and his forces. This victory paved the way for the north of England to become susceptible to Scottish raids, and it also facilitated the Scottish invasion of Ireland. These consequential events eventually culminated in the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328. Under this treaty, the English crown officially acknowledged the full independence of the Kingdom of Scotland, thereby recognizing Robert the Bruce and his descendants as the rightful rulers.